Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Leverage Your Podcast Show. I have Alesia Galati with me, who has been in the podcasting industry for so long, is a professional within production and launching, and even has her own podcast. So, whoop whoop, listeners to leads, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is like how to get leads, how to get biz from the podcasts, because really, I mean, besides being passionate about our own cause and mission, that is the name of the game, if you ask me.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So often I think as podcasters, we look at what everybody else is doing and we're like, oh, I want to make money with my show and I want to make money with my show. But as business owners, we have to be so strategic about it and make sure that what we're talking about aligns. And obviously, we're going to get into all of that, but
Yeah,
it's such an important conversation. So I'm so excited to have it.
awesome. And so, listeners to leads, I mean, that can be ambiguous. And I think people think of it differently in different ways. So, how would you describe it?
Yeah. So when I think listeners to leads, I think you are engaging your audience who are listening to your podcast. You're engaging them in a way that allows them to imagine themselves in the seat of a client and to work with you and what it's like to work with you and the kind of results that they can get from working with you so that after the episode, they think, wow, if her free content is like that, if she's giving away all this information or he is giving away all this information, via the podcast, then what's it gonna be like to work with them one-on-one? It builds that know, like, and trust factor so much quicker than a lot of the other mediums. So it's really important that as podcasters, we're being super strategic with it.
Yeah.
But that's what I think when I think listeners to leads is turning your listeners into potential leads for your business.
And I like that because I think sometimes people have like a one track mind of like, oh, it's just me sharing my website in my outro of the podcast. Or it's, people subscribing to the podcast and then hopefully they'll sign up for something. It just feels like it's such an ambiguous thing. But I like how you say it's more than that. It's like, that relationship building, the trust, and so forth. So here's a question for you, because everyone has a different opinion. So when it comes to like getting leads and clients, it's that whole guesting or hosting or both. Like, do you have a specific take on it?
I would have to say my take is both and because I'm someone who I always like to add caveats to this. I think if you have the capacity to have an ongoing show,
Mhm.
then you should definitely do it. If you do not, then a limited series is a perfectly viable way
Yeah.
to redirect your audience. And when I say limited series, I mean 12, 25 episodes of your cornerstone frequently asked questions, episodes really being able to showcase you as an expert that you can redirect people to that they can binge and listen through.
Mhm.
So I would say that is probably where that hosting side, I don't mean you have to have a weekly show, you have to
Yeah,
have a daily show. Like that is not always an option for people. And quite frankly, it's a lot of time, effort, and money. And I get
totally.
it. So that's why we actually switched to offering limited series packages in the last year because and if you would have asked me, 4 years ago, should people launch if they're only gonna do 10 episodes or 12 episodes, I would have told you no. But you're allowed to change your mind, and I changed mine.
Heck
So, you
yes.
know, I think it's a great way, but I think guesting is hands down one of the quickest ways to not only grow your show, but grow your authority.
Mhm.
And it also helps you to what you do as a service get you content that you can share on other places. The host is asking you questions that your audience is probably asking as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I agree. And I love that more and more people are thinking about seasons and series because like you said, it's content that you can use, but then you're not feeling like you're stuck in like for the rest of your life. And it does cost
Yeah.
time and money for sure. So yeah, what a great option. So what would you say is the biggest misconception when it comes to hosting a podcast?
I would say that well, there's a few things that people tend to think, and that is either I have to make it big in order to make money, which is not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily true, or that
Agree.
I have to have an interview show in order to grow quickly. That's not true either. So, for example, one of our clients, they had a podcast for about 2 years. And in that time, they sold out every single one of their group programs with less than 150 downloads per episode.
Dang, that's awesome.
Think about that. So, you don't need a huge audience in order to make the money that you want to make. No, you might not be a millionaire, but do we really all
Yeah,
need millions? I mean, we'd like millions, but we don't
right.
necessarily all need millions. So that's really important, keeping that in mind. But then the second thing being that having an interview show is the only way to grow. I have another client where she does almost exclusively solo episodes, and that has allowed her to talk directly to her audience so
Mm-hmm.
well that she only has guests on every 10 episodes, so it's very infrequent that she has guests on, but she's able to speak directly to her audience where they can go back and binge her 230 episodes and say, wow, this was so
Mm-hmm.
insightful. I need her. I need to work with her. Whereas if she had 230 guest episodes, you've got people going in and picking and choosing what guests or topics they're interested in instead of being there
Right.
for her. And so I think when we go into podcasting, especially as business owners, it's important that we go into it and we're very clear on what our goals are. So there are typically four goals that we see people have. The first is growth. They're looking to grow their show, they want more downloads. The second is conversions, that listeners to leads. The third is engagement, meaning they want their listeners to engage with them in some other way, whether that's send DMs, connect with them further, something like that. And then the fourth one is impact. And that is means they're educating their audience. Some nonprofits would probably land in there if you're more of a um, wellness brand, then really being able to create a movement is that impact piece. So
Yeah,
those are the four ones that we typically see people make. But a lot of people don't realize that they're only focusing on the growth one. And
oh,
it's
interesting.
important that when we think of, oh, I want to grow my show, grow it how? What is your goal? If your goal is to sell out your group programs or to sell out your whatever that you're offering, you need 5 new clients in the next 3 months. If it's to sell that out, then why do you necessarily need thousands of downloads to do that? And if
Agree.
you do need thousands of downloads to do that, then maybe you need to shift how you're talking and how you're showing up as an expert, because that means that there's too many people there for other people.
Well said. And highly agree. It's funny how people think podcasts and they automatically think interviews. I mean, that is a great strategy to make those connections, you know, expand your reach, whatever. But like you said, it really depends on your goals on how you're going to do your podcast. Now, before we were talking, obviously, about listeners to leads, one of the points that you talked about was the content in planning the content. Now, how does that impact? Could you may not think, oh, what does the topic kind of matter on converting to leads? But I like how you said it. So why does content and planning that out matter in your conversions?
Yeah. So think about what I just said about if you're sharing all this information and you are maybe have a guest on, you're not able to really showcase yourself as an expert. So it's really important that you have solo episodes in there and that you are very strategic on how you use those solo episodes. And that starts with the planning. And those episodes should really be tailored to what is the pain point that my potential client or the listener has right now? What's holding them back from moving forward? How can I talk through that and give them a quick win?
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that within an episode or give them an action plan, a strategy that they can implement, right away, then that allows you to show up as the expert and to be able to say, oh, okay, now I've got all this content that I can then take and repurpose a bunch of different ways. But that goes back to the planning. You can't just talk about whatever you want on your show, as much as we
Agreed.
would love to all just be able to talk about whatever we want. Your audience is there for a specific reason and for you to talk about a specific thing. So, for example, if you have a podcast, we'll use my podcast for example. My kind of pillar content is marketing, specifically to podcasts, podcast marketing, podcast content, podcast launches, and podcast monetization. And then I sprinkle in a fifth one of mindset because that tends to hold people back from doing the thing. And
Agreed.
so there's a little bit of that, whittled in there. So if I'm talking about podcast content, all right, what is something that a podcaster is maybe struggling with? Maybe it's they are having a problem coming up with new content. Okay, what are some ways that I can encourage them to write a list or to plan ahead? All right, here are some ways that I've been able to do it. Here are some examples I can share. Adding in, and this is kind of goes into during the actual episode, during that episode, sharing this is what a client did. This is how I worked with the client to help them plan out 3 months of content. It allows the listener to get that win. Yes, obviously, we want them to be able to walk away with something really relevant that they can take action on. But it also allows them to see, oh, she does this. Because if I don't
Yes.
tell them that, they just think I'm
They don't
regurgitating
know.
information. Yeah. That's like, yeah, this is how I do it. Cool. Good to know. Moving on with my life. But if they can say, oh, I'm struggling with this,
Yeah.
or maybe I don't have time for this, but she helped her client do this. I
Yes.
wonder if a strategy session would be perfect for me. And also adding in during the episode, hey, if you're struggling with this, a strategy session would be perfect for you. Here's where to go to book that, right? Like tell people how to work with you. I
Mhm.
think every time that I sit down with someone, and they're like, I want to get more leads from my podcast. Cool. Do you talk about what you do? No.
Crickets.
Okay. That is the first thing
I
for real.
know.
But like going back to that content planning, really being strategic about what it is that your audience is struggling with, whether that is mindset or what you're able to help them and support them with. And it's very tailored to your expertise, right? I'm not going to talk about, oh, you want to read more books this year. Cool, because I read a ton of books. It's not relevant to
No.
my audience. So you got to be strategic about the type of content, but making sure that it always can tie back to the services that you're offering.
And I'm glad you brought that up because so many people miss that mark. It's almost like they're afraid, like, oh, if they like the stuff, they're going to go to my website and look and see what I do. Where it's like, no, they're not. Like, and
Nope.
I love like when you always hear like bring stories into the podcasts, and that is a great way to weave in a story, but it showcases like how awesome you are and how you help people, and they can picture it. It's like, oh, they, like you said, they helped that person, they can help me. And it's so easy to do, write a list of like different stories and things that you've done and accomplished. And yeah, it's amazing how many people are afraid to talk, to openly say what they do and how they can help and share like testimonials and success stories. It's like you're not bragging. You're sharing how you can help.
Yeah, I found this definitely tends to be a struggle for women specifically, right? We're told to, oh, dim your accomplishments or
Mhm.
be quiet, go sit over there. The men are speaking, so it can be difficult as women, especially if we're in front of a mic that we're already maybe a little uncomfortable because we're pushing against the grain by talking and
Mhm.
and speaking our truth. And so what I like to tell people is if you are not sharing your stories and sharing how you can help people, they by saying, "Oh, they don't need to know this or they can go to the website," you're pretty much saying that your audience is dumb. Like they don't know how to make decisions for
Yeah,
themselves. All you got to do is present it. You're not pushing them, you're
right.
not forcing them,
No.
you're not guilting them, you're just sharing.
Yeah.
You're inviting. It's up
Hmm.
to them if they want to take that invitation or not. So by not sharing your stories, by not sharing your experiences and sharing how you're able to make some really awesome things happen for your clients, you're doing your listeners a disservice. And so I always like to think, one, I'm doing them a disservice if I don't share this. And also, there's probably somebody else who's so loud and doing it wrong, and they're listening to that person. So I need to be equally as loud or close
Yeah.
to as loud, sharing how it's possible for anyone and here's how. So I like to think about those two things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it helps me get out of my own way.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. And it, like you said earlier, like there's that mindset stuff that like people are afraid to ask. People are afraid to put call to actions in their social posts. It's like, no, people aren't going to guess what you do and how you can help. Yeah, so that is super important. Now, we touched upon like call to actions, and as a host, where do you find the best opportunities to share those call to actions?
I would say when you're talking about your services and their solo episodes, whittling in those stories, like we mentioned, and then adding in that call to action, like I
Mhm.
stated. So you've got, oh, this is what this is what you're struggling with. This is how I was able to help this client. This is what we did. This is how we mapped it out. If you're struggling as well, please reach out. I'm more than happy to talk you through this, or we can book a strategy session and then moving on to the next tip. So
Mhm.
you're kind of whittling it in and not waiting
Yeah,
to the end
right.
because from what we've seen, and this is from producing about 50 podcasts, the completion rate of episodes is anywhere from 65 to 75%. And so if you're leaving your call to action at the end, the majority of your audience and your listeners are not going to get there. So it's important that you have it in that first half of the episode, or you've got really good content that is kind of keeping them on their toes, right? Like you want to be able to make sure that it's either shorter or longer, depending on what you need to do, but keeping it super concise, but keeping that call to action
Yeah,
close to the front in a way that makes sense, right? Like we're not just shooting off
throwing it
the
in
call to
there.
action right away.
No, and I have heard podcasts where there's the intro and then there's a commercial and then there's like their call to action and then there's the actual interview or whatever it is. I'm like, "Holy Hannah."
I feel like that worked really well 5 years ago in podcasting. It doesn't anymore. The
Mm-mm.
attention span is just not there, and as what did they say on uh there's one true crime podcast where they always say skippers be skipping. That is what people do. They
I
just like
love
to
that.
skip through the front, of the episode, especially if you've got that content that they're not there for.
Uh-huh.
They're going to skip through it and you're going to miss them. So, this is another way for people who do skip your intro of what you do, who you are. They're not hearing that necessarily. They're skipping through. And so, how
I
can
know.
you weave those stories, weave your call to action throughout the episode? That's going to be really important in setting yourself apart, not just as a host, but also as someone who can offer services.
Yeah, agreed. And when it comes to, so we've kind of talked about like the planning, before the podcast is being produced, while you're producing it and kind of editing it. Is there anything that we should do as we're publishing it or when it goes live that will help convert more leads?
Yeah. So, right now, podcast listeners are down dramatically across the board. We're seeing that downloads are down, which means that less people are listening to podcasts. Now, there are some theories on why this is, whether it's Apple Podcast algorithm,
Mm,
Spotify now offering audiobooks, and people who were going to Spotify for podcasts before now solely listening to audiobooks on
or
there
YouTube, a
because
lot of
now it's
people, yeah.
available, YouTube, etc. There's a lot of things happening in the podcasting space, which means a reduced number of downloads for people. So it's important as hosts and as business owners that we are making the most of our shows. It's not enough anymore to just throw it up there and say, people will find it because they won't.
Nope.
So, finding other ways to repurpose your content for people beyond just your listeners is really going to help you. And again, this goes back to your goals. If your goal is engagement, podcast listeners do not like to send messages or to text people or to comment on stuff.
Not
They are
really.
literally doing, most of them, doing other things while they're listening to your show,
Passive.
whether that's driving, showering, cooking, walking the dog, cleaning. They're doing other things. And so it's important that we're finding them in those other places where they are more stagnant and there for the content, like repurposing that podcast episode into a blog post, into a LinkedIn article, into a YouTube video where they can maybe watch it on their TV, having it as threads, tweets, Instagram reels, TikToks, shorts. Like there's so many different ways that we can take that episode and slice and dice it, right, into so many different ways. But especially as business owners, we're like, look, I already talked about this. I
I
did the
know.
work up front and it can feel really frustrating. I get it, which is why with the rise of AI and with these really great tools that we now have access to, we can take that transcript or take
Mhm.
that video, and there are AI tools that can slice and dice your episode into those shorts pretty easily. They don't always turn out great. You got to double check them. Don't just,
Agreed.
download them and go.
Yes.
You shouldn't do that with anything with AI tools at all.
No.
Just saying. Let's talk about ethics for a second. Like, don't do that. But give it your transcript and say, this was the topic. All right. First and foremost, and this is how I like to do it personally when I'm using AI tools, I need a tone check because I have provided these tools with so many different transcripts and said, can you pinpoint my tone? And every time it says, all of these episodes are different, or all of this content is the tone approach is different. One you're more friendly and the other one you're more assertive and educational, and so your content is going to change based on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So do a tone check and follow that tone throughout all the content that you're repurposing this podcast episode into, and then go into asking it. I like to use Gemini personally to recreate it into a full-length blog post. And then obviously you got to go in, you double check it, you add in those
Absolutely.
stories because most of the time they're not going to be able to even pull those even from the transcript where you shared the stories. So you got to add in those stories, add in words that you would use, not that the robots would use, and kind of tweak those to really make the most of it. But I use that for, like you said at the beginning, I have my Listeners to Leads podcast where I talk to other podcast hosts and talk about their journeys and really be able to see what people are doing to showcase that there's not any one way to do it. But
Yeah.
then I also have a secondary podcast that we launched this year that's called Successful Podcasting Unlocked, and it's 10 minutes or less answering podcasting questions. And that works really well for me because it's great for SEO. It's great for being able to repurpose in all of this content. And so those are the tools that I like to use to be able to take that episode and really maximize it and make the most of it.
Agreed. And obviously, being on the Leverage Your Podcast show, I'm all about leveraging and repurposing.
Yeah.
So you're talking my language. Yes. And it's like, why kill yourself trying to come up with new content and reels and videos? And my God, we only have so much time when there's so much good content within those episodes, where you can showcase your authority and make consumable content where it's quick, it's going to grab someone's attention, get more engagement, and yeah, and convert them to leads that way. So thank you for bringing that up. And I haven't looked at Gemini before. I don't know that tool, so I'll have to check it out. But
Yeah, they're the Chat GPT version from Google. So
oh, okay.
they
Yeah,
used to be
yeah.
called Bard previously named Bard.
Oh, now I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And yeah, the AI, some of the stuff it spits out, it's like unleash. You like some of the words, you're like,
Yeah, no one
mastering.
talks like that. What's wrong
No, they
with you?
don't. I know. It actually cracks me up sometimes. And yeah, you have to be super diligent reviewing it, to make sure it's accurate and sounds like you. You don't want to sound like a robot. You want to sound like you.
You know what's great is that we connected on LinkedIn and
Yes.
you asked me to be on your show and I asked you to be on my show because of an article that I wrote on LinkedIn that was literally through this process. It
Love
was
it.
me creating my solo episodes, repurposing them, and I'm 3 weeks behind in my LinkedIn article versus what goes live on the show. So I have some time to review, tweak, get it right, and then
Mhm.
put that up on LinkedIn. And that LinkedIn article is different than the one on my website. Those are actually showing up better for SEO than my website is right now. So figure make the most of it. But that is getting way more engagement. Those LinkedIn articles, that newsletter, it's getting way more engagement and connections, which is the
Yes.
goal, than the regular podcast, than people who are listening. Yes, that's value for them and that's awesome. But what's going to put me in front of the people that I want to talk to, the connections that I want to make? It's putting it out into multiple places. That's what's going to make the difference. And clearly it works.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I'm love LinkedIn. It's my favorite platform. I'm always like finding things and then you go down the rabbit hole. Ooh, I love their content. What do they do? Who are they? What are the shows that they've
Yeah.
been on? Yeah, so it's my best way of finding different connections in the industry. So glad that we've connected. Is there anything that we've missed or any mistakes that people make when it comes to trying to convert more leads and clients from their podcast?
I would say that the really big part is the fear of doing solo episodes. And
Yeah.
like, I get it, but also it's your show. At that point, you're just a newsletter for other people. If you just only have
Yeah.
other people on your show, and it doesn't really allow you to show up as the expert as you really, really should be able to with your own content. Like, you own that medium. No one can take it
Yes.
away. No algorithm can change it. Nothing. That is yours. So why not be able to showcase your expertise on it? And so really just getting out of our own ways and having solo episodes. And I like to encourage people at least once a month doing, or at least every 6 episodes, doing a solo episode and then putting those into some type of playlist, whether that's a Spotify playlist or
Oh,
if you're
what a great
using a tool
idea.
that yeah, that allows you to have a like sometimes the podcast hosting platform will allow you to create playlists within. I know Buzzsprout does. I don't know about the others. So having some type of playlist where you can guide people who are new to you. Now, hey, here are my top 10 solo episodes. These are great and they really are able to showcase my knowledge, my
Yeah.
expertise. You can also use this to pitch yourself to be on other podcasts. Is like,
Yeah.
here's my expertise. I'm awesome, instead of them having to whittle through, 100 guest episodes of other people's expertise.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know I resisted doing solo episodes for like forever, so much so that I actually had another podcast with a co-host so that it was just me and them like talking back and forth for a while. And then I was like, okay, I need to suck it up and just dive in. And now honestly, I find it easy. It feels a little bit awkward, like when you're just looking into a camera and trying to look at your notes and stuff like that. But I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever. It may not be perfect, but you know what? I'm delivering tips and content that I know is going to help someone. And so that in my mind, okay, is more important than how I look, how I sound, and you get better with time.
Yes. I have one guest that was on the Listener Sleaze podcast where she said that she puts a picture of her grandma right above her camera or like right
Oh,
behind her camera and she looks at her and like that's who she's talking to and that's the kind of energy and love that she wants to like share with her listeners or her viewers. And so she's like, I don't care who you put up there. You can put up Homer Simpson, talk to him, like whoever you got to put up there, put that person up there if that helps you be able
yeah.
to talk directly instead of being like, oh, there's just the screen of me talking at myself. That, or if you have someone who's editing your podcast, a lot of times our clients will actually talk to the producers. They'll be like, hey, Alicia, I need you to take that out. I don't know what in the world I was just talking about. All right, back at it. Here we go. And so
That's
that
awesome.
allows them to feel more comfortable, like they know someone's listening, because so often as
Right.
podcasters, it can feel like we're kind of talking into the void. So if
Yeah.
you have a producer, see if they'll let you talk to them to help you
Aw.
kind of get over that fear. It's okay.
Yes, I know. That's such a great idea. And when you do get someone that they're like, "Oh my God, that episode was so helpful." I'm like, even if it's one person, you're like, "Yay." It spurs you to
Yes.
go on and like and do more. But your playlist is such a great idea. I've never actually thought of that, oddly enough. So I'll be doing that next. Best
Lovely.
of.
Perfect.
I know. You could even do a solo episodes on your best tips from all your solo episodes.
Yep. Exactly.
Repurpose.
Yeah.
I love it. How can people find you? And I know you've got a great resource to share with our listeners as well. So would love for you to share that.
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to galatimedia.com. Everything is over there. Both podcasts are over there as well. And I also have an AI and podcasting mini course. You can get it done in a less than 2 hours if you go through
Ooh.
the whole thing. And it's about how to use Riverside and Gemini. You can insert that with Chat GPT if you need to, but using Riverside and Gemini to really be able to take those solo episodes and maximize them as best
Mhm.
you can. We talk video, audio, reels, and shorts all the way through to your emails. So, really being able to make the most of those episodes. And it's only $45. So, why not?
Sweet. Yeah. Oh, what's the URL for that?
Yes, galatimedia.com/power up one word.
Perfect. I'll have that in the show notes, obviously,
Thank
as
you.
well. Yeah, both you and I have such similar approaches to the content and the goals and approach, and love that you are all into repurposing and leveraging it. High five, my friend, at a
Yes.
girl.
Yes. High fives all around.
Yes, and I'm excited to be on your show as well soon. Yeah, I just appreciate getting to know you and you sharing your wisdom on the Leverage Your Podcast show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
You bet. All right, folks. So that's it for this week, and we'll see you next week on the Leverage Your Podcast show.